I want to move on to the issue of VAT, and thank you for your update to us on the proposals that we put to you in our report of last October about tackling online VAT fraud. And I just want to whip through a couple of questions before moving on to Ms Mahmood, who's got some questions on this as well. You have we asked you to an agreement be put in place by March of next year that sets out ways in which HMRC and all online marketplaces will work together. And you came back saying that you agreed with the recommendation. HMRC will publish this agreement in April 2018 and invite online marketplaces to become signatories to it. It's very polite to invite them. Or what if they don't sign up to it?
I think we're expecting that they will, but if not, then the...
So, you mean an invite from HMRC has actually got a sort of heavier threat behind it than the wording of that implies?
It's surprising what an email from the Chief Executive of HMRC, which doors it opens, I have to be honest with you.
Well, the power of your position, Mr Thompson.
Yes, and you can use that for positive or otherwise terms. Look, if not, then there were changes which came into place on the 3rd of April 2018, which placed responsibility upon the marketplace of VAT. It also places responsibility on them for previous sales if they knew, and that they needed to display valid VAT numbers. And so the memorandum of understanding between us and the online marketplaces then reinforces that, because it allows the free exchange of data. If you recall, when you had two witnesses and you were trying to differentiate between one and the other, one of them was actually giving us information and the other was not actually.
So they're now...
Not entirely sure.
So can I be clear, are they now giving you the information that you need across the board, or some that not?
Once they sign the MOU, yes.
Okay, so how many have signed it so far? I know we're only at the end of April.
So none, because it was I think we sent you...
It is the 30th of April today, so I just sort of thought it's a possible prospect that some...
None, there were going to be some who were going to sign last week, and then with ministers, but then that didn't quite take place. I'm fully expecting the ones that you would expect to sign it. We have every indication.
So when the cameras, the flashbulbs and the minister are there, is that what the deal is? You can't...
Frankly, I think they should just sign. We
would tend to say the same, but okay. So basically, you're waiting for the photo opportunity.
The online marketplaces that you are rightly concerned about, and we are too. I fully expect them to sign the MOU and provide us with the data, and then move from there.
Okay, and you're going to publish it and update it at regular intervals. How often? Is it going to be on the website live time, every quarter? Have you any idea on that?
I thought it was going to be annual, but I would have to check.
Okay, it'd be helpful to know, because if anyone's not complying. And what's the sanction if they don't? If you're inviting them? Because there was some talk about a sanction being you take them off the list, but if they're not on it, I can't quite work that one out myself.
That's correct. I mean, first of all, obviously, it was a recommendation of the committee that we create this agreement. It's in the nature of agreements that they are voluntary for people to enter into. We're not reliant on this agreement to pursue this fraud, because we have a range of powers, and if we felt we needed more, I'm sure ministers would want to listen to that. However, the main sanction is really public visibility of the fact that you either have not signed this agreement, or if you're not complying with it, that we will remove you from the agreement, so that you could not claim to be a signatory to it when you're not actually living up to it.
We made a further recommendation about assessing the effectiveness to tackling online VAT fraud. That was recommendation 4. You say, again, you agreed with it, and that you said that the measures that you'd introduced as a result of the work that's been done so far by us, NEO and others, that this includes about 27,550 applications to register for VAT from overseas online retail businesses, and that was at January 2018 this year, and that compares with about 1,650 for 2015. So a big uplift. But how many of those have you processed so far? I mean, they've applied to register for VAT. What's the progress from January to now?
So my understanding is that they have all registered, and we're receiving additional VAT of £100 million, which is later in the paragraph.
So it's all gone through. It's not like they're just sitting there, they've applied and they're waiting to hear back.
No. So that's one track. There's the second track about us putting more people onto this, issuing the joint and several liability notices. So there's another 120 million in that, and then on top of that, you've then got the 3 further steps that started on the 3rd of April 2018. Plus the fulfilment house due diligence scheme, where registration is open between April and June. And then the government's consulting on split payments. So there are a range of different ways in which we're pushing forward.
Okay. I'm going to come on to split payments in a minute, because I think it's important questions there as well.
Yes.
And you talk in that same response to recommendation 4, the joint and severally liable notices that you've issued 1,300 of those, and and £110 million in compliance yield is being identified and assessed. So is that, how much more do you think you can get? Is that's for those 1,300 that's being assessed? You haven't yet got it. You might not get it all. How much do you think you're going to get in total from the cases that you've got on joint and severally liable notices? Because there were more than there was 2,100 cases that you were looking at, I think, overall, weren't you?
So we would not expect to get it all.
So not all that 120 million, but overall, what's the parameters? What's the range you think you're looking at?
I haven't actually sat down and added together all the measures, because there are a range of different measures here, aren't there? We haven't actually done that unless Jim.
So the Treasury's not yet banked the money.
Say again?
The Treasury's not yet banked the money then. I'm amazed you, because I'm not surprised you don't want to give a range in case the Chancellor's listening and takes you at the top end. Mm-hmm. But can you share with us a range of what you think you can get in from this? Because it gives an idea of the scale of the problem.
I don't actually have the number to hand. In terms of the measures, obviously the Office of Budget Responsibility has costed the yield that they expect the government to get as a result of these measures, and there was an update to that, I think, in the autumn budget. But I'm afraid I don't have the figures to hand. I mean, we've continued to ramp up the resources and the compliance activity, and as John mentioned, some of the measures have not yet come.
I think it's just that we like targets in this committee, but if you've got an idea of what you can get, then you know, and then you can come and explain to us, to taxpayers, how far you've got in that and what the barriers are. Because we're quite a champion of giving you the more powers you need. So we're your friends on this.
Indeed,
we criticise you heavily, but we're your friends. Really. But we want, because we want the tax authorities to get this money in, and we want small businesses in the UK to be protected.
I'm grateful for this opportunity. Of course, my famous more money, more power, more information, more people is now a meme, I believe. But
I'm sure the Chancellor's listening to that too.
Sorry, I can't give you the target actually. So
there you go.
I mean, taken together, the budget 2016 measures and the latest budget measures are expected to raise just under £1 billion by 2023. So that is the OBR's assessment of how much additional revenue.
And that's cumulatively between then and 2023. Yes. So are you going to have that broken down a bit? Because you'll see waves as you get a lot in, and I guess we know how compliance works. It doesn't always go in one straight line. So have you got any trajectory yet about how you'll get this money in and how much, what the pattern?
Perhaps what we ought to do is to give you a written response that says there's 4 packages of measures here. Yeah. Here's what the expected yield is. We
would like to see that very much, and we will then come back to it. And I just wanted to touch up on the issue of split payment mechanism, something that we've been quite keen to see. But the European Commission published a report recently, in December, which said their study found no strong evidence that the benefits of split payments would outweigh its costs. And I wondered if you've got any further thoughts on the work you're doing on split payments.
So consultation paper is out. It asks really 2 fundamental questions: who should collect the money, and there's a presumption in the paper that it's the merchant acquirer. And then secondly, therefore, what's the role of the marketplace in relation to the collection of money? Those are the 2 fundamental questions in there. Look, I think we ought to say that we, you're pushing us along here, which is good. The United Kingdom is, I think it's fair to say, pushing the envelope globally in relation to this, and there are some parties who think we are pushing it further than what might be reasonable. We think the right way of testing it is to push out a consultation paper and see whether it is operable.
Remind me when the consultation ends.
It ends on the 29th of June.
Okay, so we'll have when you're in front of us next time after, we'll be able to push on this more. But I mean, you know where the committee stands on this, so I'll leave it there for now. But Ms. Mahmood's going to come in.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a couple of questions based on some written evidence that the committee's accepted today, which I think, Mr. Thompson, from one of your earlier answers, I think you might have had sight of. But I appreciate you probably haven't had a chance to review it. To be fair, we've had very little chance to review it as well. I just wanted to ask about powers of one of the things that the written evidence by RAVAS and VAT fraud. One of the things that they talk about is in relation to the seizing of stock, freezing of funds, and the blocking of listings at their own examples that they give relating particularly to Amazon. What are your powers in relation to the seizing of stock and so on? What can you do when you issue a notice?
Generally speaking, we've got two seizure powers. One is under customs legislation, which we do use, and we've used that, for example, in some fulfilment houses where we find that goods have been misdeclared. Then we've got the right to seize them. Furthermore, we have got a right of access to goods, basically as under bailiff legislation, if we have an unpaid debt. Which I think is probably more relevant here. So if we, for example, make those assessments and then those assessments are unpaid, one of the things we would look to is, well, are there goods that we can take to help to pay towards the debt? Our powers are greatest where the goods are held in the debtor's own premises. Where goods are held in a fulfilment house belonging to a third party, then under UK law as it currently stands, we have to seek a warrant to gain access to the premises for that. So it becomes less and less of a sort of practically viable way of doing things, and we are engaging with the Ministry of Justice about whether those powers really meet our needs or whether in fact we need greater powers.
But you can get a warrant.
You can, but you've got to go through. We discussed this earlier in relation to like a mobile. There are quite stringent sort of sets of evidence that you need to go through, and it causes delays and it causes costs. So it becomes less and less of a cost-effective way of recovering your debt. So we are looking at whether we can get.
But it's not just about debt, is it? It's about the impact on other businesses that are being screwed because some people try and avoid the VAT.
Yes, I appreciate that. I think what we are engaging with is whether we can get a more streamlined set of powers that would be more useful to us.
Are you basically saying the warranty regime as it currently stands is probably too stringent for these sorts of cases where you should be able to make a straightforward application that all things being should go through on a nod from a judge?
I think from our point of view, it doesn't necessarily make sense from where we sit for why there are more stringent set of rules where goods are in a third party's premises than when they're in the trader's.
Especially when it's an online marketplace with
and
a warehouse.
In these circumstances, the traders generally don't have their own premises in the UK.
So is that the reason that you've never actually, according to Amazon, and they wrote to Chris Eden-Harris, a former member of this committee, member of Parliament, they said to him, to our knowledge, HMRC has never issued a notice to Amazon to seize the third-party goods belonging to a seller in respect of whom they've issued a joint and several liability notice.
That's correct. It's not part of our current sort of compliance method for tackling this risk, because we don't think that as our powers currently stand, it's a practical way of us making a meaningful difference here. But it's definitely an area that we want to look at whether we can use it.
You're having conversations with Ministry of Justice, is that correct? Yeah.
Yes, that's correct.
To the legislation might be required to help us further. So although we have seized pallets of goods and we have managed to close 4 fulfilment houses, frankly we think some further changes to the law are required in order for us to basically operationalise the problem we have.
That's under customs.
When do you hope to conclude those discussions? When might we expect some sort of legislative action on this front? Or when would you hope for us to have some legislative action on this front?
I couldn't say. I think first of all we need to understand there are presumably good reasons from a safeguarding point of view of why this legislation is in place. So I think we've got to assess how helpful we think it would really be to us in managing this compliance risk versus what are the safeguarding reasons for this legislation. I don't have a definite.
Would you require primary legislation? Do you think? Do you know, or secondary?
So my note says that we would need to legally extend the primary legislation. Now, we could give you a longer answer if that would help.
It will be helpful only because I'm not sure why you're looking for a simplified regime rather than an extension of the current regime. The regime extends; it can cover these. It's just you're saying it's not cost effective. You have the evidential burden is too high. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. Yeah. Therefore, we have not used it as a tool in our toolkit for tackling.
I think it would be helpful if you could write to the committee on this with more details. Thank you. And then just wanted to ask about we've had 27,500 or so new registrations. And there's some numbers in this evidence from RAVAS and VAT fraud about the auditing of those and how long it might be taking. Could you just give us an update on where you stand on auditing of their compliance and how much work is going to have to be done to reclaim unpaid VAT?
So our processes for dealing with those applications for registration are that first of all, we examine them and check that these people genuinely should be registered in the UK for VAT, and if they are, then they're admitted to the register. They are then risk assessed to determine whether they are on an ongoing basis and prior to their registration have been compliant, and if they have not, then they can be taken up for investigation, at which point, for example, we can use the joint and several liability powers against them. So that is part of a general risk assessment. They are actively monitored for their prospective compliance to make sure that they are filing returns and that they are returning liability, and of course we can investigate those returns to see whether the returned liability is correct, and we do look for evidence of whether they have should have been registered earlier than they have applied, in which case we can go back into earlier years.
So of the 27,500, is it only the ones that the 2,100 that you've already opened investigations into where they fell foul of that initial general compliance check?
In terms of using the joint and several liability powers, which are obviously the powers that we have had to date have been prospective, so we wouldn't have been able to use those in respect of past liabilities. So yes, that could be a subset of those cases. We have a variety of sources, some of which are the voluntary registrants and some of which are people who have not voluntarily stepped forward. And we can obviously compulsorily register a business even if they don't apply to do so.
And on the investigations you've opened, when do you expect? What are the sort of timescales that we're looking at in terms of how long that will take when you're complete?
It does vary on the case. one of the things in the agreement that we have published is to make sure that the online marketplaces expedite these cases and act quickly. But it does vary from case to case, depending on whether, for example, we get cooperation or whether we have to use our formal powers to obtain information. But this is going to be, it's going to be a slog to get that £1 billion in up to that date on an ongoing basis. It's not going to be a very, very simple, quick matter just to crack through this.
You're asking about the stock, aren't you? But it's worth reiterating that from the 3rd of April 18, there's a different flow arrangement in which, from that point on, it's much easier to lay the liability on the marketplace.
But how are you making sure that you're tackling this issue of Phoenix companies, which has been it's not just an online issue, but it is particularly an issue here? Company closes and reopens. Yeah,
we are monitoring that because we're aware that it is a risk. Some of our intelligence earlier on was that companies with online retailers with a good history would actually want to comply rather than use Phoenixism because of the impact on their trader history. But we are aware that is a risk that we need to really monitor and make sure whether that is having the impact that we need or whether we need to take further action.
It's a general issue over and above VAT.
Yeah, absolutely. We're absolutely aware of that. It does apply here very much here as well. Ms. Mahmood.
And just finally, obviously RAVAS and VAT Fraud suggest that you're very reliant on their information for compliance activity in this area. How many notices have been issued to traders who weren't listed on vatfraud.org or came through to you via RAVAS?
So I wish you'd asked me that question when we came and did it in detail, because we had that answer, because they referred to us a number and then we added on our own number, and I had all that information to hand then, but I don't have it now. But I happily would. We're not heavily reliant upon them. It's very helpful to have them feeding us information, but we'll take intelligence from anyone, frankly.
Okay, and you apparently in a meeting with RAVAS, Ruth Chanier of HMRC claimed that much of the fraud was due to simply ignorance of the rules by Chinese fraudsters. But I don't think in law in the UK, ignorance of the rules is enough to get me off not paying my tax.
No, quite right.
So surely it can't apply to Chinese sellers.
No, it certainly does not absolve anyone from their obligation to pay the tax. I think an important thing is that there are a range of different behaviours here, which will then respond to different responses from HMRC. So to the extent that a trader is willing to comply but is either ignorant or has found that too onerous, then steps like getting the online marketplaces to engage and communicate with them, us setting up our Chinese language website, which we've done, will actually encourage those people to come forward. There are obviously hardened fraudsters in this group, which will require a different response. I think what Ruth was trying to say is there is a range of behaviours here. It's not all hardened fraudsters. There are people who will respond to us engaging with them, and they will voluntarily comply, and we have seen some of that.
Well, on the subject of Chinese businesses, we are also now aware of this issue about, not really your area, but that a lot of the postage, the reason the postage is cheap from Chinese sellers is that this crazy deal about cheap postage for developing countries. But happily for you, Mr. Thompson, that's not in your remit. But, maybe I'll just flag it up, because it's something, while you're looking at these issues, that ought to be taken into account, because it certainly hits British business. Anne-Marie Morris has got a quick question on this issue, and then I'm going to move to Mr. Rowley.
VAT is a European tax. Clearly, when we come out, we will set up our own, I suspect at the start, mirror tax. But going forward, there are likely to be changes the government wants to make. How flexible are you? And because you'll need to be when there are issues around, can we change the weight of the tourism-affected businesses, tax, etc., to be competitive with France? So where's the flexibility, and how do you see those two taxes diverging, and therefore how are you going to ensure you can put in place the resources you need to deal with that?
Divergence is probably a bit beyond Mr. Thompson's remit to set tax policy, though he might like to try. But
it's relatively straightforward. It's clearly, in the repatriation of value-added tax, it will be for future Treasury ministers to decide what policies they want in relation to VAT.
But
it's speed. How fast can you then switch it? Because you then got.
So first of all, it is worth saying that there is actually an international OECD model for VAT, which the EU model closely reflects. So whilst there would be sovereignty for a UK government to make its own decisions, you might expect that we would stick to a recognised OECD model, which would reflect the.
So how quickly could, as Ms. Morris said, how quickly can you change VAT?
It really depends on the change. If you're talking about, for example, introducing a reduced rate, there's already functionality for reduced rates. I think we can do that pretty quickly. If it's about changing the classification, for example, of what's zero rated or standard rated, generally speaking, that is, our systems don't do that. That is the software in the traders, and we can. It would be the timeline that they need to change their systems, and we had some experience of that around sort of 2009-10 when successive governments changed the rate of standard rate of VAT. So I think around rates we can move pretty quickly if that's what. So
roughly, so if Ms. Morris was the Chancellor now, she said I want to change the VAT rate for hotels because she's protecting tourism in Devon. How quickly would it? How long ahead would the politician have to make that decision for you to implement it?
It's days and weeks, not years.
Weeks, not years.
Days and weeks, not years. It's a relatively flexible tax in that sense, because the obligation is on the taxpayer.
Okay, we're going to thank you very much. Well, it's useful for us to know. And we're going to move on to Mr. Lee Rowley, who's going to probe some of your customer service standards. Mr. Rowley.